I'm Claudine Wong, joining you from KTVU in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm joined now by Mario Zelaya, who is the president and CEO of Bad Axe Throwing, which has 40 different locations, primarily in the U.S. Mario, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it.
So another business and company impacted by coronavirus, obviously. Tell me about all your locations. Did they they're all shut down with the exception of two that have just recently reopened, and we want to talk about that. But just give me a little bit about your company, what you guys do, and who you are trying to serve. It's a pretty fun entertainment style company.
Yeah, it's new. We like to call it bowling 2.0. So it's kind of a much cooler version of bowling. Instead of throwing a bowling ball down a lane, you're throwing an axe and you're sticking it on a target. So we're honestly in the
Yeah.
business of selling fun. So we're there to show people a great, memorable experience. So whether it's birthdays, a special occasion, weddings, bachelor parties, bachelorette parties, we get a lot of corporate events and team building activities. Companies coming in wanting to, just get the group of co-workers together, or even just someone looking to take out and show them a great time. But
Yeah,
yeah.
it's good aggression. Yeah, I have some video. We should just play it and let people see what we're talking about here. In terms of how the business had been going prior to this, I mean, how was business?
It was great. I mean, we were and have continually been always expanding. We generally we're expanding at a rate of about one every month to 6 or 7 weeks. So we have this huge pipeline of locations that are just kind of constantly being churned out in the work. So we had no debt. We had always been profitable since inception. So we had this very great company. We have great staff members that run it, and things were going exceptionally well. And
When it's all hit.
yeah, I mean, things turned ugly real quickly.
Yeah, I mean, your San Francisco Lake location, one of your longest ones, it's been open, you said about 3 years. What was a normal weekend like?
It was busy. Like we would typically have, several hundred people come through our doors, at least, or at a minimum. And we did quite well. We had a lot of, the tech companies that would come out for team building activities. They would make a trip out of it, and we would be one of the, their main stops. So it was performing exceptionally well, and we did extremely well. We also did very well with people who were visiting, like tourists. So
Hmm.
we had a family of 2, 3, 4 people who had heard about it, and maybe they read about it in the airplane when they were touching down. They saw axe throwing was there, and it's in, Bad Axe Throwing is in San Francisco. So they would come stop by on the weekends and pay us a visit. And yeah, unfortunately, all that has obviously dried up.
Now, when all of the shelter-in-place orders went in, did you guys shut down just immediately? And were you worried from the start, or did you think, okay, we can handle this for a while? You talked about no debt. You were doing well. You were growing. You're like, okay, we got this for a bit.
Yeah, so when the orders came down to shut down, I mean, it all kind of, we saw the writing on the wall. When the first warnings came up, we knew it was just a matter of time before all the dominoes fell. And so what we started doing is we started taking proactive measures in anticipation of and what might happen afterwards. So back then, we're talking about 2 months ago, rubber gloves were readily available. Clorox wipes were readily available. And so we started ordering those supplies for our staff. So they would
Hmm.
have rubber gloves, they would be wiping down all the bar stations, all of the axes. So we had a lot of the best practices that are being suggested today over 2 months ago. So we started taking those extra precautions for any customers who came in. So we were going kind of over and above what we needed to at that time, and we wanted to be sure. And then within a matter, I think, of like maybe 4 days at most from when we received the supplies to when we implemented those new policies, the shutdowns happened essentially across all of the US and all of Canada. And so we then had to halt our operations.
How many employees are we talking about in terms of who was affected?
Over 300. So
300.
over 300 of our staff members have all been laid off.
So difficult. So then, this turns us to where we are now, where everyone's talking about, okay, now we're opening back up in certain parts of the country. And that had to be good news, from a business sense for you in terms of how you do that and maybe getting some people back to work and certainly not obviously in the San Francisco location but you had Georgia, and you said Oklahoma City, that you've had some opportunities to open your doors. How did you think it was going to go? How did you prepare for that?
Yeah, so luckily we had prepared a lot of those procedures beforehand. So from an
Hmm.
operational standpoint, we were ready. The other things that we had to consider as a small business was, um, uh, does it make sense to call back my employees? Because there's likely not going to be that many shifts for them. If there's no shifts, I'm going to end up hurting them because they went from earning potentially more in their unemployment insurance than what we would be able to actually pay them. And so, we had to make the conscious decision of, we're going to do a very slow rollout. So we'll only call back maybe 1 or 2 employees where we normally would have maybe over a dozen. And so we started doing that slow rollout in Atlanta, and we called the staff. A staff member back, 2 of them actually. They ended up working the whole weekend, and during that whole first weekend when we opened up, we had 2 customers. So 1 customer for every employee we had all weekend. So as you can imagine, the labor costs for that are exceptionally high, and so it ends up being very difficult to essentially just even cover my labor costs, let alone utilities. So the grand openings did not go so well. Oklahoma City was a bit more promising. The numbers were slightly higher, but still not enough to cover our labor costs. So we ran into kind of a scenario where things were very difficult, and they still are. And so we're making some adjustments to our business operations to be able to kind of weather the storm as best as we can.
Yeah. Was it a surprise to you? I mean, did you think that people would be ready to go out? Did you do a lot of advertising to say, yeah, we know we're open? I mean, why do you think people aren't coming?
I think so much fear has been instilled in people that they're just not willing to come out. Last I heard, there was a survey that was done. I can't remember what company did it, but they found that 1 in 10 people were willing to go out. And so I think honestly, until either there is a cure, or B, the maybe more accurate data comes out from the government that says, hey, we've actually tested, X amount of people, and we found that 40% of all Americans have the coronavirus, and it's actually not as deadly as we thought it was, until that type of language and communication comes out and that confirmation comes out. I think things are going to be very slow for a long time.
Because I mean, in terms of operation, are you talking about just not being open for as many hours so that you don't have to staff it
Oh
as?
yeah. That's correct. So part of the changes that we're making, like we're making several changes, and we'll all call pivoting. Like we're pivoting very quickly, and essentially reorganizing the way we normally do business. Normally we will have what are called set walk-in hours. So if you don't have a group of 8 people, you typically cannot book a group event with us at all. So we lowered those minimums down. So instead of it being a minimum of 8 people, we have a minimum of 4 people. So that was one of the major changes that we had made. The other one that we had made was providing incentives for people to want to book. And so, if you book now, you get a free T-shirt or a medallion. So, I
Mhm.
got people excited. We got some bookings coming in. The other thing that we changed was we are no longer going to be open just randomly during our what we would call normal walk-in hours. We're not going to just wait for people to hopefully stroll in the doors. That will put us under, and that's clear that that's not a path to success for us. That we have to go by the booking only approach, and it has to be private lanes.
And are you planning on doing that? Yeah, private lanes. Let's talk about that first before we talk about how you're going to implement this, at all your locations. We're looking at this video where obviously people are pretty close together. It was obviously taken before all of this started. How are you changing this model so that when also people come in, they feel like, okay, I'm not going to get sick here, or I'm not going to, there's no way I can, or we're minimizing the spread, I should say.
Yeah, so any groups that come in together, they're going to be grouped together within a lane. So that lane is going to be private. It's going to be dedicated only for them. We are also going to implement every other lane rules. So if another group comes in, we're not going to put that group within 6 feet of you. So we'll use the other lane beside it.
Mhm.
So essentially, we're going to be spacing people out, so we can comply with the 6-foot distancing rules and best practices. So the idea is we don't want to put anyone in harm's way. Everyone's going to be getting a private and dedicated lane.
That changes the economic model as well, but I don't think we have a choice to do that. The changed hours, the bookings only, the fewer staff members. Will that be something now that you've gone through 2 openings of your 40 that will happen at every single location, including San Francisco, whenever it opens? Because now you know how this recovery is going to happen, and I think it sounds like you're convinced it will be much slower than you would like.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the preliminary numbers that we've seen, and I think we're using it as a way to gather data. We want to see from week 1 to week 3 to 3, 4, 5, and so on. How are those numbers increasing? So we definitely want to continue collecting the data from the locations that are currently open. We're still going to keep them open for the weekends while doing the booking only events. And so the idea is it has changed our business model substantially because like most restaurants, they can't operate at 50% capacity when they're operating at 100% capacity. You're only creating a 10 or 15% profit margin. So you reduce the revenues by half. It makes it very, very difficult to make it a viable business going forward. So it's quite tough.
Yeah. Do you think you'll survive? I mean, that's a tough question, but I'm sure it's one that you've asked yourself. Do you already anticipate closing locations? I mean, you grew at such a rapid rate. How does this recovery impact?
Uh, we will survive. I see us as being survivors. I think we've done every reasonable measure possible in order to ensure that. If we don't, it's going to be such a massive, widespread problem across the U.S. that doesn't just affect us. It should affect at least 90% of the businesses. I see our operation being very lean, well run. Our growth curve with no debt and having to raise no external capital shows how well the organization has been run from the get-go. There's not any other company in the industry that has the growth rate that we have. And so if we don't survive it, I frankly don't know if many other small businesses are going to survive it. And so the reality is, we're working hard to make sure that it is a viable business. The one thing that has affected us right now, which, we're not doing, and I don't believe any other company is doing now, is expanding. And so, we've had very difficult discussions with our landlords where we have these signed lease agreements. We had signed them, they had maybe started getting permits to get us in there. The reality is all that stuff has to be put on hold because there is no capital to build. There is no capital to expand. Right now, what little capital is left is to sustain the business. And so the discussions we've been having with our landlords are really more of do you really want to move ahead, spend all these extra dollars to get a space where you might be able to collect potentially 1 month's worth of rent and give up the next 7 to 10 years worth of rent, or should we both be patient? And
Yeah.
the best win-win scenario is let's both be patient, let's weather the storm, allow us to get back on our feet, so then we have the capital to be able to expand, to be able to pay your rent, and then for us to both have a viable longer-term return on investment over the next decade.
How many locations were you in the process of opening new ones?
I believe 6 or 7. So we had quite a bit where we have these obligations with our landlords. Some
Yeah.
of them have unfortunately invested several $100,000, and so they're in very tough scenarios where rightfully so that they want to get their money back. They want to know when they can start getting paid. They want to know when Bad Axe is going to be in there. But unfortunately, we're not this money pinata that exists
Yeah.
that you can hit and you can immediately start getting returns. As soon as that trigger gets switched, it will potentially bring down the whole portfolio. So not only will it affect you, but it will affect everyone else. And so I think we've been doing a great job, and I think all landlords are being reasonable and understanding that our success is directly tied to their success, and our fates are tied.
Yeah. Do you think it's going to be harder in cities like San Francisco to reopen when San Francisco's been closed down much longer than other places? So getting back into a habit of going to an entertainment venue, whether it's Bad Axe or whether it's a movie theater. I've heard some people talking about how difficult it is to feel not only comfortable, but also seek it out.
Yes, I think I think just as a general rule of thumb, I think that there's a combination of potentially the length of period of time, which you talked about. I think the longer facilities and locations and cities have been shut down, the more difficult it is for them to go back to their normal routines because they develop new ones. Maybe
Hmm.
that new routine is I'm going to watch Netflix every night. Maybe the routine is I'm instead going to go for walks, or I'm going to do cycling and take on other activities that maybe are not hitting the wallet. And so I think there's been new habits that have been formed that will permanently affect what used to be people's standard habits. And so I think time definitely does play a role. I think the other factor that comes into play is people don't have jobs. I mean, a good chunk of, what I read was a good part of Los Angeles is unemployed, and they're seeking benefits because of the industry that it houses, the small retail stores, the restaurants, the bars, the shops, all those things come into play where you have a huge chunk of the population that no longer has income. And the income that they do have coming in from unemployment is barely enough, if at all enough, to pay their obligations, their bills, utilities, insurance, car, rental payments. And so they're now in a scenario where, why on earth would I spend money to go to a movie theater? Like, why on earth would I, go out and engage in discretionary spending? And so I think we're, economically speaking, it's a very tough situation on top of the fear of the virus itself.
Yeah, and when they get back in though, with the handful of customers that you did have come back in and revisit, do you think when they left, right? I was talking to someone who lives in Oklahoma, and she went to the gym for the first time, and she's like, I thought I would be nervous, but after I got there, it felt okay, and now I feel better about going back. Do you think over time, how long do you think, and how long are you planning for those old habits to kind of return with a comfort level and an economic comfort level in terms of spending?
Honestly, I think treating it as two separate things to look at. I think the comfort level, just from being able to be out as a whole, I honestly think it's probably going to be anywhere between maybe 3 to 6 weeks for habits to start coming back to normal. Like, oh, actually, you know what? I went to the mall and nothing happened to me, and I'm okay, and I'm going to do this now, and I'm going to try this, and maybe I'm going to go to this other restaurant, and I'm going to get takeout. And so I think that the habit formation process will probably be similar to the new habit formation process that has happened over the last 2 months. So I think maybe anywhere in between 3 to 6 weeks, I think people are going to be more comfortable getting out and about and doing what they normally would have done if the virus was not here. And then the other component is that the big unknown is the financial. It's tough because we're in this odd ecosystem where you cannot go out and spend unless you get income, and you can't get income unless you get employed, but you can't get employed unless that income isn't coming through. And so it's this weird cycle.
Yeah.
It can't just kickstart itself immediately. And so it needs to, there needs to be something else that happens that helps trigger the economy, to comfort people, to let them know that, like, hey, everything's fine, everything's going to be all right. Your jobs are stable, your jobs are back. But right now, there's such an interdependency between that cycle that until that cycle is kind of kickstarted back to normal, it's going to be a very difficult and long road.
It's certainly hard to be patient,
Yes.
especially when you have so much on the line. Well, Mario Zelaya, I am sorry for all that you have struggled through, as we all try to get through this pandemic together. And I certainly hope for a faster than expected recovery for Bad Axe across the country in the 40 locations, and when you open back up in San Francisco as well. We appreciate you talking to us.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a nice day.
All right. Mario Zelaya, who's the president and CEO of Bad Axe Throwing. And for more interviews, you can go to coronavirusnow.com. Thanks for joining us.